All right, Wilhelm, good morning. Such a pleasure to see you, and welcome to this video podcast, Game Changers.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And look, before doing this interview, I went a little digging, did a little extra research about you. We've been connected over the years with a few projects at hand where we have been collaborating with Creative Zone. We're going to get into that during today's session, but. On this research, I get to learn you are actually born in Venezuela, Caracas, to Norwegian parents. You lived in Florida for some time. You came to Dubai. Tell us a little bit about your background. Who is Wilhelm, and how did all this come about to you being here in Dubai?
Wow. So my father was an entrepreneur. He is still a very intelligent guy. Was a former professor at MIT, which found him, for whatever reason, in the 70s and 80s, living in Caracas, where there's a big oil and gas boom at that time, before Chavez nationalized the oil. And I was born there. So I'm the youngest of four kids. I was born in 1982 in Caracas, right before things got really, really bad. And then within 3 years, we left to England. I grew up there for about 8 years, then Florida, hence the American accent. I studied business. I went into shipping like a good Norwegian would. We have shipping or oil and gas. And then sort of after 7 years in a career job in shipping, which found me here in Dubai about the tail end of that 7-year period, I ended up realizing that this wasn't for me. I wanted to follow, I think, in my dad's footsteps and become an entrepreneur. So that's when I started my very first company, which I then later sold to fund e-car as a business.
And when you went into shipping, it was already in the shipping of cars itself. So there was always something to do with cars, and then you ended up starting e-car. What was this connection with cars that you've had from the past?
Yeah, so I think the shipping piece and cars just happened to be kind of circumstance. But I don't know necessarily if that part of my career helped me in, like the logistics side helped me in mobility per se. I think I learned some skill sets in the corporate world on how to interact with employees and how to be a good manager. But I think that the two worlds are quite different. So much so that when I decided to get into mobility, I had to hire a consultant to literally teach me everything. And I was very thankful that Sandra is her name. She flew in from Canada, and for about 3 months, provided like a mobility for dummies sort of setup for me, because I was fascinated by it. But it was really like grassroots, starting from zero kind of thing, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we take this cool, sustainable approach to transportation and, really bring it to cabin crew was the first idea. But we knew always that we could probably make this thing a lot bigger because it was a blue ocean and no one had done this before. So my partner at the time, Ravi, and I, we proceeded accordingly, and here we are 7 years later.
So, Wilhelm, we were earlier talking about Dubai and the role that Dubai has played in your success, if we could call it. How could you describe that? What do you see? What Dubai has done for you, and how optimistic are you about the future ahead?
I mean, Dubai, if it wasn't for the RTA, for example, and the other government entities giving us these kinds of approvals, understanding and being visionary about future of mobility, none of this would be able to happen anyway. So Dubai is super forward thinking, and what they do is take these kinds of small SMEs and build them out and sculpt the future.
Yeah. So take us back. I mean, what sparked the sort of the launch of e-car? I understand you are the region's largest car sharing app in the Middle East. Tell us, how was that eureka moment on how things got started?
So, I have to give credit where credit's due. So Ravi Busari, my close friend, and I were in his community swimming pool in the Dubai Marina, and it was his idea. He had asked me, "Hey Vilhelm, have you ever heard of car sharing before?" which I hadn't. He's Canadian, and in Canada, car sharing is huge. So I started digging into it, and I realized, like, wow, this is actually super interesting. But as you know, as history would show, we never launched. Well, we didn't launch until 2 years after that swimming pool conversation, because just getting the approvals and getting the permits and being able to do this kind of thing proved a lot more challenging than I thought it would. But it did give us a time to sort of establish a business plan and a structure and these kinds of things. But you know, credit is due to Ravi for thinking of the idea of bringing this to the Middle East. As I'd later learned, he had told a couple other people in history before me. But I think I was the only one who's crazy enough to say, hey, I'd love to be your partner and do this.
Yeah.
You know, that's when we named the company eCar.
Okay.
EK, of course, being the call sign for Emirates Airlines. So the idea was to bring cars to cabin crew who could otherwise not afford a car, it didn't really make sense for them to own a car because they were only in town 10 days of the month. So that's how it all began.
And there are a market of about 20,000 cabin crew in the UAE?
At the time, I remember there being 18,500 cabin crew who were living in the accommodation towers. That's where we could park.
So that became your main target audience at the beginning?
Yeah, that was the little problem we're trying to solve. And actually, we ended up launching in Abu Dhabi with Etihad Airways first.
Wow. Because
we got approval from Department of Transportation. So 2016, we launched with 14 cars. It was really basic. The day we launched, the app froze. It was a horrible launch, but we've learned a lot since then. And today we're about 2 million trips.
Wow.
So we've figured it out since then.
That's with something about 3,000 cars on the road at the moment?
Yeah, in that neighborhood, yeah. We would definitely have a lot more cars if there wasn't this global shortage of microchips and just general manufacturing of vehicles. So we're constantly waiting for new cars to come into this market and in Saudi Arabia. It's just one of those things that we have to deal with now for the next year as, you know, the new world order is kind of, you know, coming into play.
And you went also from a team of 3, I believe, to over 150 employees. You're talking about the shortage of cars as well. What would you say have been some of the main challenges for driving this company forward? Is it the shortage of cars, finding the right people, the right talent, the right building the right team?
100%. So I think as you progress as a business, you go through these sort of like these steps, these, you know, over its natural progression. And I think also as an entrepreneur, you're not necessarily suited to be the right person for each one of these steps, especially for me. Sort of when we've hit that sort of point now where this is a pretty well-oiled machine, I've realized that, you know, I'm not the smartest person in the room around, you know, my senior leadership, and that's a great thing, right? But I would say sort of in the beginning, some of the challenges would have been things as simple as realizing that the third-party technology provider we're using wasn't able to handle more than sort of 1,000 bookings a day. That became problematic. So from that, we had to build our own technology stack. You know, maybe a year later, we realized, okay, we want to launch into a new country, Saudi Arabia. And then we realized Saudi Arabia is completely different from UAE driving behavior. In Saudi, you know, UAE, 15% of the population are Emirati. You know, there's a lot of expats from different areas, different driving behaviors and so on. In Saudi, this is now a market that is dominated by new women drivers. If you recall, about 3 years ago, women gained the permission to drive automobiles. So what a great idea, but to have, you know, e-car being a first car solution for women. So, you know, but they have never had history of driving before. So there's all kinds of nuances that are coming from these various markets that we're dealing with, and challenges that come up along the way. Today's challenge, as we talked about, is this sort of global car shortage. So now we're looking at more macro problems for e-car, which is okay. You know, like we just have to deal with it. Our response to that problem has been uncovering what's known as peer-to-peer sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we empower somebody's private vehicle to be rented back out onto the platform, right?
Okay.
Like an Airbnb of your personal
Is
car.
that an option through the app? So
It is.
individuals can put their own cars into the roster kind of thing?
Precisely. In Saudi. It's not quite legal yet. There's still a federal law that we're looking at seeing if we can amend in UAE. But in Saudi, this is legal. We're licensed to do so. So, our vision of the future is having car ownership. We've always seen car ownership as being something that would go away after a while. We also see the traditional car rental market, that business model also kind of going away after a while because technology is just so much faster and it's so much more convenient. Like, why would you ever want to wait at a kiosk at an airport, and scan a passport and deal with all these things when you can just simply click and go?
Yeah.
Same thing pertains to people who are car owners. You buy a car off the lot, it depreciates in value 20-25%.
Yeah.
But imagine if that car could be rented out whenever you don't need it.
Yeah.
Our magic number is 8 days a month. So if you can rent a car for more than 8 days a month, doesn't matter if it's an economy car or a luxury car, you're in the money, meaning you're actually going to make more money than that cost of that vehicle for you. So all of a sudden, this otherwise depreciating asset could become an investment. And so that's sort of our view of the future for those wanting to be owners of vehicles. Will become e-car entrepreneurs, literally buying small fleets of cars and putting them into e-car to make residual income.
So what's next for Wilhelm Hedberg in the coming years? Are you seeing yourself fully focused on e-car? Are you having some other things up your sleeve that you're thinking about?
Definitely for the foreseeable future, for the next couple, at least 3 to 5 years, would be heavily focused on e-car. We want to get it to the position where we can do an IPO with the company. I think that in general, going through that experience would be such an enriching, learning experience as a business person. But that said, I think that my sort of entrepreneurial spirit would have me always want to do something, right? There's been a couple things that have come across my plate over the years that I found to be quite interesting. One of which is there's a lot of interesting work happening in hydroponic farming. I think that's super fascinating. A company called Pure Harvest that's doing incredible work there. Sky Kurtz and his team. Not to say that that's something that I would want to replicate, but it's something that definitely I find to be super interesting. Their team is also working on salmon farming, for example. How do you change a desert into a place where you have Norwegian salmon swimming and being sold in the local markets? It's incredible how the technology is transforming that. Figuring out ways to get consumer goods to people in a short, easy, and environmentally friendly way. These things fascinate me, and potentially someday in the future I'll be working in that kind of space.
And as you were just saying, I'm sure you get a lot of people coming to you, having seen that you had a successful journey with e-car. You must get a lot of entrepreneurs wanting to come and pitch you their ideas and get them to get some help from you in probably tips on fundraising and how to get going. What are some of the sort of tips that you could give, or what are some of the failures that you see people making when they come to you and they show you their plans? What is it that they're missing, do you feel?
It's all kinds of stuff. But so what I always tell entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, before coming to have that meeting and that discussion would be, do you have the basics? Number one, do you have a business plan put together? Do you have a deck, right? And do you have an understanding, a clear understanding of how this is going to actually literally turn your life upside down? And not necessarily in a good way, right? So there's this kind of theme that being an entrepreneur is somehow sexy, or your life is going to become, or you're going to become like a millionaire and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's not like that at all. You can easily give up a 40-hour work per week career job and then move into an entrepreneurial role where you're making half the money or any money at all, working 80 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that ambition. You need a business plan and you need a deck. If you have those three things, then yeah, then we can talk. But even then, it's only 10% of companies are making it past sort of year 3, 4.
Yeah.
So it's an uphill battle. That being said, I encourage people to do this kind of thing, especially students. I think that if you have nothing to lose, you're the best type of entrepreneur, right? So if you've already built up a solid career, maybe you have a lot of savings, maybe you have a small family, I think there's a lot more to lose, right? But if you're a college student, by all means, because what difference is it to you anyway? You're still eating hot dogs, you know, so it doesn't really matter. So I definitely encourage younger people to look into getting into this space for
Excellent.
sure.
What does the future of mobility look like 20 years from now? Also thinking the role that the governments are playing in developing transport infrastructure around the world. We sometimes look at these futuristic movies and we see these sort of lanes or car lanes where everything is sort of commoditized cars, the people jump in and out, and there are these big highways that take you from one place to another. It makes it look as if people are actually not even owning those cars. What's your take on what's the future of mobility look like?
Yeah.
Having in mind the role of the government and what the government is doing in bringing sort of a lot of the infrastructure projects.
So I think Dubai is a good example of future forward-thinking city and mobility planning. But the reality is, in order to get to what they call stage 5 autonomous, meaning there's no steering wheel in a car, we're about 10 years away from that, okay? And we'll be 10 years away from the point where that's going to kind of be the norm. So vehicles are going to actually, so 10 years of moving forward in major cities like Dubai, New York, London, Paris, etc., will have hardly any owned vehicles. Ownership of cars will be something like a hobby. The same way that the horse and carriage market was then eventually taken over by the automobile, right? Before it was a status symbol to have a horse, let's say. Like this is a way for you to kind of get back and forth and get around. Once the car was introduced, the horse became something of a hobby, at best, to have for the equestrian. Same thing will happen with automobiles. It's just going to be for the hobbyists that would own it. But we'll have these vehicles basically going from charge station to pickup to charge station. And and we've had super interesting meetings with not just autonomous OEMs looking to build these out, but also what I find the coolest are these bus pods. So effectively what they're looking to do now is make these little cubes that can connect and charge with each other, so they can splice and split up and pick up. But you can actually book, so the future looks like you can book a Starbucks pod that will come pick you up. So you go in this pod and there's a barista there giving you a coffee, and that's the experience you're having on your way to commute to work, for example. Now, in sort of tier 2, tier 3 cities around the world, there'll still probably be car ownership for the next, at least I would say upwards of 15 years, maybe 20 years. 20 years from now, arguably most everything will be autonomous in all tier 1, 2, 3 cities. And also we'll start seeing a lot of underground tunneling systems, like Musk is working, Boring Company, looking at doing supersonic travel underground, which is going to be a big thing. From what I've been reading and hearing and getting from a lot of these conferences, is that the concept of like flying taxis is going to be a bit more of a novelty. That's probably not going to be as much of that as we might imagine. I think most travel is going to be actually underground, because people don't want to have the air pollution of having things flying overhead all the time. And
here in the region we have the Hyperloop project.
Hyperloop,
well, that kind of relates to what you're talking about.
Precisely. So Hyperloop is going to be amazing. If I recall, it was something like 14 minutes to get from Dubai to Abu Dhabi.
Correct.
That's incredibly fast and convenient. But of course, there's a ton of infrastructure that needs to get built for a Hyperloop, right? So it's going to make sense for common commuting zones, right? But you can't just put hyperloops everywhere, right? It's got to be between major metropolises predominantly, right? But it's super fascinating to see, how that's going to unfold. So I think that's coming live in the next couple of years, actually, the Hyperloop here, yeah.
So let's go back into eCar a little bit deeper now. I've seen that you went through a few rounds of funding. Where do you stand at the moment in terms of how much was it raised? What's the valuation of the company currently? And what's kind of the next 2-3 years look like for eCar?
Yeah, so today we've raised close to 45 million US. That's full funding of the business. I definitely see a path forward for us to have a Series C raise come next year. I think with the global financial crisis currently, a lot of technology companies are taking a hit when it comes to valuations. Mobility, we've seen some successes. Trucker just had a recent $100 million raise, and kudos to them. A really strong team, and they're looking at doing an IPO as well soon. There are examples, though, of other companies, without naming names, that have maybe not done as well in the mobility space that are coming from the Middle East. So I think our strategy is more or less to sort of give it some breathing room, wait and see, and collect our thoughts. And I imagine we'll start the fundraising process for Series C come sort of Q2 next year. In which case, we'd probably be looking at a $30 million to $50 million round, if not higher. But again, this is kind of early days for us to look at that. As far as valuation of the business, that would be something that the lead investor for next round would put the flag in the ground and determine. But I'm sure they would be happy to see the fact that over the last 10, 11 months, eCar as a business has 3x'd in its revenue. I mean, the company is doing quite well. So it's just a measure of finding those right partners. It's really all about finding strategic investors as well, as I've learned. Not all investment money is created equal. We've been massively lucky and privileged to have a venture capital company called Polymath that joined in as our lead on the Series B round. That was a $17.5 million round that we did. And backed by true professionals. I mean, these guys literally reshape the way our company works, structured governance protocols, and all these kinds of things that, to be honest, a first-time B2C entrepreneur I had no idea about, right? But to have that level of structure has made all the difference in the world. When you get to the stage where you're no longer kind of a startup company anymore. I mean, I guess we kind of are a startup company, but we're really a growth stage business at this point, right? So, and as I was talking about earlier, with these sort of steps and these layers, different skill sets are required along that journey, right? So they've been absolutely phenomenal in getting us ready for that step. I envision that the Series C investor would probably be the type of investor that has experience on a more global scale, especially with focus on IPO. So, I'm envisioning that, over the course of the next sort of 3 years, eCar will be well positioned to go public.
Excellent. I could understand that you, at this stage, educating the consumer and the public about the benefits of this model must be a major challenge for you, or something that you must be focusing on a lot. I mean, you must be going through that customer acquisition drive and to educate people about it. Is this the right thing to say? Do you feel this a stage?
We've gone through phases. So the first couple of years, a lot of it had to do with support from the RTA, which we're very thankful for them as a partner, of course, as well. But word of mouth spread very quickly, and our cost of customer acquisition was relatively low. It got to the point, actually, Lorenzo, that we for every dollar that we'd spend, we didn't necessarily see any uptick because we didn't have enough supply of vehicles.
Right.
In peak hours, there hardly be any cars remaining. So every dollar spent on marketing was like burning a dollar. There was no point. Now, in today's world at eCar, we're pulling in about 2 million-ish data records every day. So we have a tremendous amount of data. We understand exactly the kind of user behavior that we have. What are the demographics? How do we target certain things, segmentalize, and so on. It comes down to what we say an LTV to CAC ratio. So LTV is lifetime value. So we now know, okay, how much a joiner or a member of eCar, what's their lifetime value? You divide that by the cost of the customer's acquisition. And in the world of tech, if that number is around 3, meaning for every dollar I spend on marketing, I get back $3, right? This is a really healthy ratio. If it's below that, you got some problems with your marketing. If it's above that, you're not spending enough. So the 3 is kind of that magic number. And we found ourselves always in a position where we're 3 or a little bit above. And that's been the way it's been for like the last 2 years.
What's your average consumer? Well, if you could give us some stats in terms of, how often do they rent the car or they get on the app through the month? How long are their journeys? I'm sure there's some interesting data there to be shared.
100%, yeah. So we have about 300,000 plus registered members. A couple of interesting facts. So about 15% of them in the UAE are female drivers, but in Saudi it's closer to 20%, which is interesting because, again, as mentioned, only a couple of years ago were women allowed to drive. So this demonstrates just what a push it is and what an interesting form of first car solution it is for women in Saudi. Other kind of interesting anecdotes, most of our user base are between 25 years old and 40, so kind of younger people. We have a lot of young families that might need a second vehicle. In our pay-per-minute service with the RTA, our average trip time is about 45 minutes long. In comparison to ride-hailing companies, their average trip in the UAE is 12 minutes. So it's a different type of mobility solution in the vertical. But of course, with eCar, you can also book a car for a day, for a week, or you can subscribe to a car for a month. So we've kind of learned as well, there's different demographics to user types. Whereas the pay-per-minute user might be more price sensitive. They realize the fact that an e-car is half of the cost of a taxi.
Right.
It's a third of the cost of a ride-hailing solution. So that's really enticing for somebody who's looking to get around town in a convenient and inexpensive way. And then on the other side, we have the users, like for example in Abu Dhabi, who recognize, hey, I want to use a Tesla, and they can book that out for a few days, right? So the full gamut we have at eCar now, and it continues to grow out, right? We have Land Rovers, we have Range Rovers, we have Teslas, all the way on this high end, and then on the economy scale, we have things like Nissan Kicks and sort of like these other kind of, more economy level vehicles.
I think people don't realize with this app, it's cheaper, more affordable to take one of your cars and take it from downtown into the Palm where we are today, rather than taking a taxi. And taxis in the UAE is not something that people see as an expensive sort of exercise. What's a bit of the formula behind this? Have you come up with a bit of a percentage? Can we say how much cheaper is it to drive an e-car or to take an e-car instead of a taxi, for example?
Yeah, so again, it's about half the price.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But also, it depends on, like, if you're going to book a taxi, you're going to book a taxi from point A to B.
Yeah.
If you're going to book an e-car, typically you book an e-car, you'll take the kids to school, you might go to the shop quickly, and then do something else, and then drop the car in front of work.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more of a, it's 45 minutes. Imagine in a ride-hailing or a taxi, that's expensive.
Yeah.
Right. You mentioned from downtown here to the Palm. In a taxi, off the top of my head, I would say maybe that's about 60 to 80 dirhams, somewhere in that range. With e-car, it's like 15, right?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how it can be cheaper, obviously, is because we remove the cost of the driver.
Yeah.
You remove the chauffeur, then the unit economics change radically.
Yeah. Looking back at things, what would you have done different? What were some of the mistakes that, if you knew going in, you could have done in another way, would have made things a little bit simpler for you?
I mean, like, this is like a never-ending question. There's a million things that we could have done better, right? Some bigger ones that come to mind, I would say, recognizing the value of good investors. I think that's one of the bit that I would say that would have been a primary focus. Understanding, again, not all money is created equal, and having strategic investors like Polymath Ventures is a game changer for us. We as a company have gotten better because we've surrounded ourselves with smart people. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I've ever had in this business, for sure. Secondly is the power of incentivizing great talent via employee stock option plans. I think that's something that goes, and it's not really that well understood by a lot of startup founders. So in short, you can build out an ESOP pool, as it's called. And what's interesting about the Middle East, sort of an interesting sort of, let's not call it a hack, it's not, but an interesting way that we can look at ESOP is that, let's take the United States, for example. If I were to, let's say, have a company in the US and I want to have somebody on board and get employee stock option, you would give stocks at the nominal rate, you get stocks at the cost at which it is today. So that whatever the valuation of your company is today, due to taxation reasons and capital gains tax, that employee can only make the upswing of whatever it's today versus the 4 years vesting or what have you. However, in the Middle East, due to taxation, non-taxation regulation on these types of things, you can actually give employee stock option plans at what we call nominal rate, meaning you can give a stock option plan at the equivalent cost of 1 US cent per share, which means effectively, let's say you're a bigger scale company, you can attract great talent around the world and say, look, starting day one, you could have X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars of inherent baked in value day one. So that's a kind of a little tool for everyone who's listening to realize that this is extremely powerful. And Dubai is becoming more and more, especially over the last couple of years, it's becoming more and more attractive for talent, like smart, great talent. There's brain drain happening in Hong Kong and Singapore, and a ton of people are now moving out to Dubai. And I think a lot of that has to do with how well the government handled the COVID situation. And a lot of tourists came to Dubai and realized, like, hey, we live in this is a beautiful place to live. And there's a ton of opportunities here. So anyway, point being, for those listening who are entrepreneurial or have a business, ESOP is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned as well on gaining great talent.
What would you say, and you're mentioning Dubai now, what would you say has been the role that Dubai has played on you becoming successful at launching this company? What are some of the things that Dubai has given you, and how optimistic are you about the future of the Emirate?
I mean, Dubai is, let's start with the government, right? So we are partners with the RTA. If it wasn't for the RTA, we wouldn't be in business in Dubai, right? So we're forever thankful for the RTA's support in that regard. Same applies in Abu Dhabi with the Department of Transportation. Again, without their blessing and support and understanding of future mobility trends, we wouldn't be here right now, right? Same applies in Saudi Arabia with the Ministry of Transportation and so on. In Dubai, we look here at this beautiful place at the view, and you'll see cranes still, right? We're still building out buildings, and I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon.
How long have you been living in Nepal?
13 years.
13 years. Ah, so you're a palm boy.
Yeah. That reminds me, actually, we had this basketball tournament in Sharjah,
Yeah.
and we're horrible at basketball anyway. But the people were playing against, they take it super seriously.
Uh-huh.
And Ravi Basari and I were on a team with one other guy, and then the announcer was announcing the team names, and he's like, the Mad Basketball, whatever, against the Palm Boys. That was our team name. It was so funny. and I don't know. That's always stuck with me. So when you said Palm Boys right now,
That's the team.
we lost all credibility. They're like
The frat boys. The palm.
Yeah.
I'll be surprised if they manage to.
Figure it out. So you see here we have.
Yeah.
Click, scan it.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, and that unlocks.
Wow.
Just like that.
That's good.
Yeah. And then from there, keys are inside.
Yeah.
Cool, right?
Good.
Yeah.
So this is the whole e-car experience.
This is e-car experience. So now we booked the car,
Okay.
and now we're gonna learn how to drive the car first.
There you go.
So sunglasses on.
Yeah.
All right.
I feel like I'm going on holiday or something.
I know, right? Because of this car. It's actually kind of a cool car. Peugeot. Let me go this way.
When it comes to these cars and all that, I have a big dilemma in my life when it comes to investing in cars and like in expensive cars or going for things that, because the kind of what
It's
you
fun.
get is
Yeah.
pretty good.
I mean, look, this is, we have super high-end cars as well, right?
Yeah.
We're also in talks with some of the supercar companies, the
Yeah.
rental car companies, because people are interested in booking supercars by the minute as well,
Yeah.
right? And now that's our big discussions these days, is talking to the OEMs and saying, hey, open up the APIs for us, so we don't have to build these hardware units, and it makes life much easier.
And they're okay with that. They're
Yeah,
happy
but
with
imagine the
that.
future. It's like the dashboard here will have an
Yeah.
e-car app.
Yeah.
You get automatic fueling,
Right.
cleaning. You get driver scoring, so how well you drive. You can get coupons and things like this. That's sort of where we're headed. It's the future.
Now we go into a section called the rapid fire session.
Okay.
I will, bring up maybe a phrase or a word. You have to give us what's the first thing that comes to your mind.
Okay.
So I would say, what does success mean to you? What does success look like to you?
Joy.
Good. Your favorite book?
4-hour work week.
Someone you admire?
My father.
Favorite destination as a holiday?
Maldives, surfing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Let me go through my notes here. Favorite movie?
Braveheart.
Good. Elon Musk?
Pioneer.
Technology and AI?
The future.
Good. Yeah, that's what I have.